Welcome back to this last chapter of the video series on the end of the First World War and its immediate aftermath. This video is on the German Revolution and its repercussions in Cologne. The revolutionary experience in Cologne was very representative for all Germany, as you will see. Now, the revolution arrived quickly at Cologne. Already on 6th of November, a Social Democratic People's Assembly gathered in Mülheim, that is in an explicit workers' quarter, and vividly called upon the population of Cologne to participate in the revolution. And it did so in very characteristic words, as they were demanding a bloodless revolutionary movement in orderly channels. In other parts of the world, this is like postulating the squaring of the circle. Already the other day, two of the revolutionary leaders, or better, two of the social democratic leaders, Wilhelm Sollmann and Jean Meerfeld, contacted the first mayor Konrad Adenauer. Again, elsewhere among revolutionaries, to talk to the official authorities may not appear the first thing to do for a revolutionary, but here it was the case. Not by chance, as both social democratic representatives were buddies of Adenauer, so to speak. Sollmann had joined in 1915 Adenauer in the Food Commission and was his vice director or main assistant in the Food Commission, and he followed him then in various offices in the city. In November 1918, as we will see, he prevented the revolutionary escalation and worked closely with Adenauer to maintain order and political continuity. Later, he was a member in the Weimar National Assembly, then in the Reichstag, and he even, for a time, was interim minister of the Interior under Gustav Stresemann. He, of course, was rather a right-wing social democratic man, and a strong supporter of the Weimar Republic and a vocal opponent of the Nazis, who expatriated him in 1934. Sollmann then went into exile in the USA, where he taught social policy and the history of the labor movement. After the war, he was a lecturer at the University of Cologne, but he died in the USA in 1951. Jean Meerfeld was a local social democrat, a successor for the Reichstags, for the parliament mandate of Sollmann. He was until 1920 in the Weimar National Assembly and until 1924 a member of the Reichstag. An elder man in the city of Cologne, he was the head of Department of Art and Public Education, actually opposed to political Catholicism, and among other things also an author of a critical history of the Catholic Center Party. Nevertheless, he held a special relationship of trust with Konrad Adenauer. I think both men speak for themselves, and it was good luck that they had been in charge at the Social Democratic Party in that period. So these three discussed the situation the other day, and when they then learned that a train was underway packed with sailors from Kiel who apparently wanted to liberate their comrades imprisoned in the fortress of Cologne and would then bring the revolution to the center of Cologne, they decided to act. At first, Adenauer had tried to convince the Prussian governor to block the train before he arrived at the station, but the governor was horrified by the idea to have his soldiers arresting the comrades from Kiel. Obviously, he could not trust in his men anymore. Hence, Sollmann, Meerfeld and Adenauer changed plans and acted on their own account. The sailors arrived, stormed the fortress, which due to the lack of resistance was indeed a bloodless event, and then went on to proclaim the revolution in Cologne on the Neumarkt, where they were assisted by the local representatives of the Social Democrats, Sollmann and Meerfeld. Now, the fortress did not resist the sailors because Adenauer had advised them not to do so, and the proclamation on Neumarkt went peacefully because Sollmann and Meerfeld had fully supported the sailors but made sure that the ad hoc formed Workers' and Soldiers' Council was made of trusted comrades and led by the Social Democrats. The day after, a delegation of the Revolutionary Council was received by the first mayor Adenauer in the town hall, and Adenauer even provided the soldiers' council an office in the town hall. He fully supported the council in its takeover of the town. Again a day later, on the 10th of November, the council selected a provisionary city government, which was quite dramatically called Welfare Committee, probably an involuntary reminiscence to Robespierre's infamous institution. And then they choose a president of that Welfare Committee. And who was it? None less than Konrad Adenauer, who became the president of the Welfare Committee. Already on November 11th, large parts of the rest of the Workers' and Soldiers' Council preferred to return home to their families rather than to disturb the work of the first mayor and his Welfare Committee. Nevertheless, the revolutionary impact was immense. The newspapers reported in several editions per day. Committees, assemblies, and rallies followed on a daily basis, often several of them in parallel, at least one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and then several in the evening. The country clearly was in uproar, and major changes were unavoidable. A revolutionary pressure had built up that was waiting for a resolution. And still, the whole thing happened in a charming sense of order, quietness, and peace. This was not the case everywhere, to be clear. In other cities, like Munich or Berlin, clashes between the political extremes, communists, Spartacus Federation, or other left radicals on the one side, and monarchists, nationalists, and radical conservatives on the other side, such clashes were frequent. But all in all, the revolution was an unusually consensual affair. In Cologne, the real problem was to recatch the freed criminals, as the sailors on their first day had freed everybody in the fortress, not only their comrades. And while the soldiers were quickly amnestied, the thieves, robbers, and murderers who had benefited from the generosity of the sailors for several months led to a substantial increase of the criminal statistics in Cologne, until they were finally identified one after one and brought back to prison. Another real problem was the orderly and fast demobilization. Cologne, due to its military functions and centrality, was a retreat hub, and the city administration did everything it could to get the incoming soldiers out of town as soon as possible, well aware that any build-up of soldiers, which were depressed, disillusioned, and dissatisfied, carried the risk of uproar and upheaval. Hence, the main station was busy for days with extra trains in all directions, while refreshments, entertainments, and cheers along the incoming routes kept the soldiers' spirit high. Tens of thousands of soldiers returned from the Western Front and crossed the city. Many wounded, all disillusioned. Cheers and warm welcome in Cologne helped to stabilize their mood. Here we see a banner on the bridge which very patriotically salutes the true victors, as it says. Seid willkommen, tapfere Krieger, einer Welt ihr hieltet stand. Ja, euch grüßt die wahren Sieger. Dank erfüllt das Vaterland. That's what it sounds when patriotic heroism is formulated in bad rhymes. Well, and well-organized transportation prevented the situation from deteriorating into open revolt. Here, kids obviously hijacked a military car. Well, the revolutionary activity hadn't yet come to a rest in Cologne when the armistice was announced. Cologne suffered from direct impact of the regulations. As we have seen, the quick withdrawal caused logistical problems of channeling the masses of soldiers, but what was more, the occupation of the territories on the left bank of the Rhine by Allied troops would mean that the war could not end for Cologne as in the other German provinces. Occupation meant a continued presence of foreign soldiers, a continuation of the state of war under foreign domination, and as you can see here on the map of the occupational zones, Cologne was part of an area over here that was designed for for an occupation until 1926, and it was assigned to the British Army, while other areas were destined to an even longer occupation, in the worst scenario until 1935, by Belgian and French soldiers. So the Belgian area was, of course, from Aachen upwards north, and that's the British area over here, as we have seen, and the French was basically from the entire Eifel downwards to the Saar area and even further south. So that was quite an occupational area, to be honest. The Rhineland occupation that started in December 1918 left no doubt that Germany had lost the war and was a defeated nation. A total of 280,000 British soldiers was deployed for the occupation, even though the number soon decreased substantially. But in 1919, Cologne hosted 55,000 soldiers in the city. They must have been virtually everywhere. The headquarters of the British Generality was based in the Hotel Excelsior, a noble choice, as until today the Excelsior is the first address in Cologne, right next to the cathedral. Here we see them exercising in front of it. To accommodate such a large number of soldiers, the city that was still suffering from war restrictions and hadn't yet turned to normal functioning had to obey to large-scale requisitions. Schools, hotels, and about 2,000 private apartments were confiscated for military purpose, and many owners had to accept uninvited and at least initially also unwelcome guests in their houses. What is more, the British, in fact, continued to keep the city under military law as they established their control. Of course, the inhabitants of Cologne quickly got used to the sight of British tanks and officers, but their permanent presence was a constant reminder of Germany's defeat. But above all, the occupation was an economic burden for those who had to provide quartering for soldiers and officers, for the producing economy, as many traditional lines of commerce and supply were interrupted by the occupational control. Clearly, the economy hadn't yet recovered from the wartime situation, and the conversion from wartime production to civilian production further overshadowed the economic activity. The occupational forces did not make things easier, though. Unemployment was high, not only in Cologne, but everywhere in Germany. As we will see next week, Germany's obligation to pay huge sums of reparation did keep the economy down and prevented a quick recovery. However, the British were fair occupiers, and given the general openness of the Rhinelander, cohabitation soon took on friendly forms, and some fancy traditions of the British could quickly convince the people in Cologne, always ready to incorporate all kinds of extravagancies into their traditional carnival. More importantly, during the period of high inflation, even the average British soldier was a rich man when spending his small pay in the city. Hence, the bars and breweries of Cologne soon identified in them their best and most beloved clients. Nevertheless, the occupation was also a political challenge. We have already mentioned the psychological effect of living under the eyes of the victors, even if they were more or less sympathetic and not very much intervening into everyday life. As a consequence, a separatist movement regained strength, the so-called Rhineland movement, which picked up the idea of an independent Rhenish republic from the times of the French Revolution. The idea now was to get rid of the occupants by establishing an independent, peaceful and neutral republic as a buffer between France and Germany. This idea, at least initially, appealed even to a man like Konrad Adenauer, who sympathized with the movement in 1919, even though he never militated for it and soon turned away from it. The Rhineland movement, which had various hotspots in the Rhineland, but also in the Palatine area, that is Mainz and more in the south, and in the Saarland, even further south, remained a clearly minoritarian movement, actually even a tiny minority, but it maintained a number of journals and newspapers, one of them being the Rheinische Republik, the Rhenish Republic, published for a few years in Cologne. As it was politically harmless and did not recur to violence or aggressive propaganda, it should not be overestimated. And probably it would have been already forgotten by now if it weren't for the fact that Adenauer, after the Second World War, was blamed for reviving the ideas of the West German Rhineland state when he accepted the division of Germany and took the political lead in the West German state. But this is not only very much later, but also a very different story, and drawing a line from the Rhineland movement in 1919 to the division of Germany in 1949 is entirely unfounded and unacceptable. And with that, that's all for today. Thank you for your attention. Bye.